to give Volodymyr and his people the aircraft support that they need.
My question to President. Я б хотіла запитати вас, чи задоволені ви цим євротуром? І я так розумію, це частина підготовки до Вільнюса. Які ваші очікування від НАТО саміту в Вільнюсі?
Live from London, this is BBC News. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky makes a surprise visit to the UK for talks at Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's country residence, the pair discussing fighter jets and training for pilots. The visit to Chequers comes as Britain announces it's to send long-range attack drones to help in Kyiv's fight. In other news, too close to call, Turkey appears headed for a runoff vote for president after the country's most closely fought election in decades. And in a rare interview with the BBC, Bangladesh Prime Minister says her country can no longer deal with the Rohingya refugees who fled Myanmar. Welcome to BBC News. I'm Vaughan. We're going to start with these whirlwind events here in just outside London, here in the UK. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has just left after a meeting with the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. High up on the agenda, it now seems, is the issue of fighter jets. That was the issue that they talked about, and we're trying to get more details on exactly where they stand on that issue. This is them, just to explain, in the last half an hour or so at Chequers, which is the UK Prime Minister's country residence, and Rishi Sunak there on the right, Volodymyr Zelensky on the left. They had brief talks under 2 hours or so, and this is a flavour of what they spoke about, because afterwards they stepped in front of the cameras. Let's have a listen. And we just had a quick pause there as we said goodbye to some of our viewers watching in the UK on BBC Two. For everyone else, thank you very much for your company. I'm Vaughan. We're going to continue with this extraordinary whirlwind visit of Volodymyr Zelensky to the UK. It was a surprise, but perhaps not too much of a surprise, given that the Ukrainian was also in Italy, Germany, France, with a very quick round of meetings, effectively shoring up support for Ukraine, and also, of course, a message of thanks for the support already given. A very difficult diplomatic balance for him, in essence. Of course, showing gratitude to so much support already given, but continuing demands for more and continuing complaints for some time about the speed of delivery, and that's something I'm sure will have been at the top of the agenda of this meeting here in the UK. You're watching BBC News. Right then, as I said, we just paused a second time there just to say goodbye to some of our viewers across the world. But I want to speak now to Kia Giles, a senior consulting fellow with Chatham House's Russia and Eurasia programme. Thank you so much for coming on the programme.
Hello.
What did you make of this whirlwind visit then? Right, I want to bring you back to our main story this hour, the one that's been developing over the last couple of hours actually, which is Zelensky's visit there to the UK, surprise visit this morning. And there he is walking alongside UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, of course. That is at the country residence of the UK Prime Minister, Chequers. They spoke for a couple of hours inside, spoke about continued military aid and support. And it seems like, from what they said shortly after the meeting to the cameras, that part of the big focus was on jets, fighter jets, military jets. Ukraine saying that it needs to control the skies as part of any counter-offensive against Russia, and there will be now the process of building a coalition of support for fighter jets. Plenty more on that story. For the moment, I'm Vaughan. This is BBC News.
lift everything. We lift everything.
Behind every headline,
Дай Бог, чтобы они доехали.
there is a human story. This is our world.
History is important. A true sense of belonging. It's a living culture.
A series of documentary films that reveal the human drama at the heart of global events.
When you allow a country to take away one of your rights, you give that same country permission to take away all of your rights.
Життя триває, у нас двоє дітей.
There are different experiences. There are different kinds of people.
Our world. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
This is BBC News, the headlines. Our top story: after talks with Britain's Prime Minister, Ukraine's President Zelensky says the pair discussed Western nations providing Kyiv with fighter jets. Zelensky had been on a surprise visit to the UK. And too close to call, Turkey appears headed for a runoff vote for president after the country's most closely fought election in decades. Our members of the LGBT community in Nigeria speak out about being targeted by criminal gangs on dating apps. Right, we're going to get a bit more now on our main story this hour. President Zelensky's visit to the UK in the last couple of hours. Here he is at Chequers with the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Chequers is the countryside, rural retreat of the sitting UK Prime Minister. And they were there to discuss, of course, Ukraine's war with Russia and the continuing support that the UK and other countries will provide. And we got a little nudge about what the priorities were, because now we know that this phrase that I'm sure we're going to hearing a lot more of now is Jets Coalition. So they went inside, and as you can see in front of the cameras here, they posed for a couple of words, but then the real talks got underway when our cameras were out of the room. They spoke for a couple of hours, and then afterwards they came out, and President Zelensky decided to talk about this phrase, Jets Coalition, basically saying that we can't control the skies. So Ukraine can't control the skies ahead of any counteroffensive with Russia. So one of his big priorities now is this Jets Coalition, fighter jets, effectively. And we now have some reaction to this visit from Russia. So let's take a look at what they've said. Russia, in a spokesperson, basically saying the UK's actions would only lead to further destruction in Ukraine as Russia steps up what he called its special military operation. So hardly surprising at all that the Kremlin there in Moscow, in Russia, very critical of more support going to Ukraine. Let's speak now to Yuri Sak, an advisor to Ukraine's Ministry of Defence. Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Let's start with this phrase then that Volodymyr Zelensky used, Jets Coalition. What does he mean by that? You could tell. I think the line was pretty bad, and the delay was a bit too much for us to deal with there. Apologies for that. We will try and get back to Regina a little later. Now, though, around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Well, you're live with BBC News. Next. Members of the LGBT community in Nigeria have told the BBC about becoming targets for criminal gangs on dating apps, a crime known as keto. Nigeria has some of the strictest anti-homosexuality laws in Africa, with victims falling into the traps of blackmailers who gain their trust by posing online as LGBT, only to extort them. BBC Africa Eye gained exclusive access into a civil defence unit hunting down suspected blackmailers. Ian Wafula reports from Lagos. Now, an ice cream parlour here in the UK has been forced to change the name of this product, formerly known as Percy Pig ice cream, It comes after this polite request from Marks & Spencer, which owns the copyright for their Percy Pig sweets. The retailer said Fabio's Gelato said they could still use the product, just not the name. So the ice cream parlour launched a competition to rename the product, with the result being announced in a few days. A couple of the contenders apparently getting piggy with it. This is BBC News. Live from London, this is BBC News. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky makes a surprise visit to the UK for talks at the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's country residence, and the pair discuss fighter jets and training for pilots. The visit to Chequers comes as Britain announces it's to send long-range attack drones to help in Kyiv's fight. In other news, too close to call, Turkey appears headed for a runoff vote for president after the country's most closely fought election in decades. Hello, I'm Lewis Vaughan Jones. Welcome to BBC News, and we're going to start with our continued coverage of that visit by Ukraine's President Zelensky here to the UK, visiting the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in the Prime Minister's country residence, which is called Chequers, which is just an hour and a half or so outside London. And here they are in the last couple of hours after they spoke for about 2 hours, and after their private conversation away from the cameras, they, as you can see here, stood in front of the cameras. And interestingly, President Zelensky wanted to highlight one issue in particular, which he called a jets coalition, a focus on fighter jets. Let's take a listen. OK, Hugo, thank you very much for that. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're live with BBC News. Next to Turkey and the election there, most of the votes are now counted. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has 49.4%, not enough to win outright. You need 50% for that. So now a runoff election in 2 weeks' time looks the most likely outcome. At the moment, he said he would accept the result of any runoff. As for his opponent, got around 45%. So if confirmed, it will be the first time a challenger has taken Erdogan to a second round in a presidential contest. Erdogan's been in power for 20 years, remember. He told supporters in the capital, Ankara, that he was confident he would still be president in 2 weeks' time. Now, on the other side, Kilic has large support from secular Turks and young people, and he says he would win the election in a second round, saying Erdogan failed to get a vote of confidence from the people. Anna Foster reports now from Turkey. Now, the British Academy Television Awards have been taking place here in London. The Most Memorable Moment award was given to Paddington Bear having tea with the late Queen Elizabeth during the Platinum Jubilee party at the Palace celebrations, which was shown on the BBC. There's plenty more, as always, on the website, and do download the BBC News app. For the moment, though, I'm Lewis Vaughan Jones. This is BBC News. Bye-bye. This is BBC News, the headlines. After talks with Britain's Prime Minister, Ukraine's President Zelensky says the pair discussed Western nations providing Kyiv with fighter jets, as Zelensky has been on a surprise visit to the UK. Members of Nigeria's LGBT community speak out after being targeted by criminal gangs on dating apps. And in a rare interview with the BBC, Bangladesh's Prime Minister says her country can no longer deal with the Rohingya refugees who fled Myanmar. Right, let's get a bit more now on our main story this hour. President Zelensky's unscheduled visit to the UK, visiting the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Here they are at Chequers, which is the official country rural residence of the British Prime Minister. And they spoke for a couple of hours. And it seems like one of the main things they spoke about is the issue of fighter jets. After their private meeting, they came out to the cameras and Volodymyr Zelensky talked about a jets coalition, wanting to build support for that idea. And that's clearly his focus on the message he wanted to get out of that meeting. And shortly after he introduced himself and that idea and that phrase, I then spoke to an advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Defence and asked what he meant by that. And you can find the full film on BBC News Africa YouTube page. Just search for Quito, blackmailing LGBT Nigeria. Now, around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're live with BBC News. Now, more from Bangladesh, where, as we've been reporting, officials say a nightmare scenario was narrowly avoided at the world's biggest refugee camp as a powerful cyclone ripped through the south of the country. The storm passed over the weekend with no deaths at the camp. Cox's Bazar is home to almost 1 million Rohingya refugees who fled the brutal crackdown by Myanmar's military back in 2017. 5 years on, the camp is beset by overcrowding, difficult conditions and crime. The Bangladeshi authorities have relocated thousands of refugees to a remote island in the Bay of Bengal, but the move has been criticised by the UN and rights groups on the grounds of safety. Well, the BBC's Yalda Hakim sat down with Bangladesh's Prime Minister and asked her about these concerns. That was my colleague Yalda asking the questions there. Now in football, Barcelona have won their first Spanish league title for 4 years after beating Espanyol 4-2. It's their first title since the Argentine World Cup winning forward Lionel Messi left Barcelona in 2021. Congratulations to him. I'm Lewis Vaughan Jones. This is BBC News. Live from London, this is BBC News. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky makes a surprise visit to the UK for talks at Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's country residence. The pair discuss fighter jets and training for pilots. Turkey looks set for a runoff vote for president in 2 weeks' time after the country's most closely fought election in decades. And here in the UK, the BBC discovers some people are being wrongly diagnosed with ADHD after online assessments by private clinics. Hello, I'm Lewis Vaughan Jones. Welcome to BBC News. First this hour, Ukraine's President Zelensky has left the British Prime Minister's country residence following a surprise visit to the UK. Now, after talks, the two, Rishi Sunak pledged long-term support for Ukraine to ensure that it's able to defend itself in the future. Mr. Zelensky said the pair had discussed Western nations providing Kyiv with fighter jets with the aim of creating what he called a jets coalition. Our World Affairs correspondent Caroline Hawley reports. Right, let's get some of the day's other news now. The United Nations says the month-long war in Sudan has forced nearly 1 million people from their homes. Despite an agreement to protect civilians, both the army and the rival rapid support forces have continued to fight in densely populated areas, especially the capital, Khartoum. Most of those who fled remain within the country. President Biden says he expects to meet congressional leaders on Tuesday to discuss a plan to raise the US government's debt ceiling and avoid a default. Speaking to reporters in his home state of Delaware, Biden said he remained optimistic about agreeing on a deal. A meeting between Biden and senior lawmakers on Friday was postponed. And here in the UK, in what's thought to be a world first, driverless buses have entered service in Edinburgh. The operator Stagecoach says 5 single-decker buses have the capacity for around 10,000 passenger journeys per week. And despite their name, the buses still have 2 members of staff on board to monitor the technology and help passengers. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're live with BBC News. Next, Turkey's electoral authority just confirmed that the presidential election will go to a runoff in 2 weeks' time. 28th of May is the date. No candidate reached 50%. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has 49.5%. His opponent, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, almost 45%. It will be the first time a challenger has taken Erdogan to a second round in a presidential contest. Erdogan's been in power for 20 years. He told supporters in the capital, Ankara, that he was confident he'd still be president in 2 weeks' time. On the other side, Kılıçdaroğlu has large support from secular Turks and young people. He says he would win the election in the second round, saying Erdogan failed to get a vote of confidence from the people. Anna Foster reports. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is BBC News.
EU regulators look set to approve Microsoft's $69 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard, just weeks after the UK rejected the deal. And Vice Media Group files for bankruptcy in the United States, but the youth-focused news firm, can it find a buyer? Hello to you, a very warm welcome. This is World Business Report. I'm Ben Thompson, and we're going to start with one of the biggest deals of the decade, Microsoft's long-running $69 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Well, that deal looks set to be given the thumbs up by the European Union. Well, that's despite being rejected by the UK just 3 weeks ago. Well, the UK says it was concerned that any such deal could hinder future competition. Now, you may know Japan approved that takeover in March, but the US Federal Trade Commission is also seeking to block it. So what exactly is going on? Let's speak to Mike Ingram, who's Senior Market Strategist at Active Trades. Mike, good to see you. What's going on? Because some countries are saying, look, we have no issue with this deal, and the UK and the US have some very specific reservations. One that we'll watch very closely. Mike, good to talk to you. Thank you. Mike Ingram there, Senior Market Strategist at Active Trades. Now, the company behind Vice and Motherboard has filed for bankruptcy in the United States. Vice Media Group was valued at $5.7 billion just 6 years ago, but it can now be snapped up for around $225 million. But that's if the firm can find a buyer. Vice has been popular with the under-30s for its digital approach to news content. Well, watching this is Samira Hussain, our North American business correspondent. She's in New York. And Samira, where did it all go wrong for Vice? Samira, I know you'll follow that for us and update us if there are any further details. But for now, thank you, Samira Hussain, live in New York. Some other business stories for you this hour. A much anticipated new round of debt ceiling talks between US President Joe Biden and Republican leaders is expected to begin on Tuesday. Congressional Republicans are demanding budget cuts in exchange for lifting the so-called debt ceiling, while the White House has insisted for months that the nation's credit should not be up for negotiation. Argentina's central bank will raise its benchmark interest rate to 97%. That is part of a package of measures aimed at reining in soaring inflation. That has risen to more than 100%. It is the third time in as many decades that the country has experienced hyperinflation and the prospect of economic collapse. The government will also increase intervention in the foreign exchange market and open up imports of items such as food to discourage markups. The UK's Trade Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, has arrived in Switzerland hoping to secure a new trade agreement between the two countries. The UK government is continuing its attempts to forge post-Brexit economic ties outside the EU. The UK hopes to update its current agreement to make it easier to export services, financial, legal and architectural, among others. And in the UK, the regulator Ofcom has revealed that Royal Mail only delivered 74% of its first-class mail within the promised 1 day, which is below the required standard. Ofcom rules state the figure should be closer to 93%. Well, Ofcom said it was opening an investigation into what's gone wrong. Now, I've been following events in Turkey in the news, but of course there is an economic angle to all of this. The country's currency, the lira, has hit a 2-month low against the dollar, with that election runoff now looming. Turkey has been grappling with a cost of living crisis. Inflation is running at 44%. That's been a key issue on the campaign trail. Well, our reporter Victoria Craig sent us this report from Ankara. Now, if you wear a suit to work, are its days numbered? Maybe you're working from home and don't wear one at all. And do suits still hold the power that they once did? Well, Aaron's been speaking to Nicola Ricci, who's the chief executive of Stefano Ricci. It's an Italian suit maker to the rich and famous. Do you think he was wearing jeans underneath the camera there? Totally think he probably was. More from us on the website. We'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
You're live with BBC News. Now it's time for the sport. We can head to the BBC Sports Centre. Hi, Gavin.
Yes, hi there, Lewis. It was another dramatic weekend at the top and bottom of the Premier League, and there's more to come this evening with Leicester City taking on Liverpool at the King Power. Leicester were resoundingly beaten by Fulham last Monday and go into this one inside the relegation zone. Victory, though, moves them out of the bottom three. There we go. That's all the sport from us for now, Lewis. We'll be back with more later on. We'll see you then.
Great stuff. Thanks, Gavin. Now, junior doctors in England have already been on strike for more pay. Now, senior doctors or consultants are also voting on whether to take industrial action. Their union, the British Medical Association, says the government's latest pay offer is unacceptable. Consultant salaries start below £90,000, that's $113,000, but can rise to near £120,000. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, reports. Next, the US presidential election is still more than a year away, but the battle for the Republican nomination is hotting up. The Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, is widely expected to confirm he's running. 6 months ago, he was topping the polls, but since then, he's fallen behind Donald Trump. Undeterred, DeSantis has been setting out his vision in key states such as Iowa, from where our North America editor, Sarah Smith, sent this. Now, the human race likes to test itself, whether it's running a marathon, climbing a mountain, going into space. People want to push themselves. The latest example is a researcher from Florida. Tim Allman explains. Good stuff. Not for me at all. Plenty more, as always, online. And do remember to download the BBC News app if you are online. You can follow me on social media at Vaughan Jones. Matthew is coming up next. For now, I'm Lewis Vaughan Jones. This is BBC News. Bye-bye.
Hello there. In contrast to last week, this week is looking much